In this video, we're going to import our own object into Substance Painter and use some more advanced techniques to make a realistic looking material on it so that you will be able to export it out then to Sketchfab. So let's begin. When you open up Substance Painter, we are going to need to import in our asset. So we're going to go to File, New, not Open Sample like we did in the last video, but New. It works a little bit differently than some other programs that you might be used to, where we can't just drag and drop in 3D models or other assets. You can't just like open up the 3D model. You actually need to make a new project. So the template we're going to work with is the PBR Metallic Roughness. Alpha blend is fine. If it's the other alpha, the alpha test, that it's okay as well. We're not going to be working with the alpha, so either of these are going to be fine. Since we're not going to be putting this into a game engine, this is usually a good basic one to work with. For file, we're going to locate the object, and for this demonstration, we're going to be working with the tombstone. So let's open that up. Document resolution, I like to work on a 2K texture. That tends to work pretty well. And the normal map format is going to stay on DirectX. Since we're exporting this out to Sketchfab, DirectX is fine. DirectX we would also use if we're going to take this over into Unreal. But if we're working on a Unity project, we would want to switch it over to OpenGL because that's what Unity uses. But DirectX is perfectly fine for Sketchfab. Once we have that set, all we need to do then is click OK. And you can see the tombstone that we have. So let's first take a quick look at this asset so that we can, see what we have to work with. So 3D view, pretty standard. If we switch over to the 2D view, we can get a look at our unwrap, which is again pretty straightforward, nothing too crazy. If we go and we look over here under texture set, we can see we only have one texture on it called Tombstone Matte. So we don't need to worry about, we're not doing multiple materials on this. Usually the first thing I do like to do when I start a new project is I do like to bake out my textures, and we do that underneath the texture set settings. We normally, you tend to work with a high poly baked onto your low poly. We don't have a high poly for this. A lot of times you might not end up with a high poly, but you still are going to want to bake your mesh maps. The reason is because then it kind of opens up other things available to you, some cool, fun extra techniques. So let's go ahead and do that. So that's underneath texture set settings. We're going to click on bake mesh maps. I'm not going to go over everything in this window. There are lots of guides out there that can kind of tell you what every single little thing it needs. I just want you to be able to get started. So first things first, double check that you are baking on the material that you want. We only have one material, so that's fine. Our output size, we're going to switch it to that 2K since that's what we're working in. We're not going to need to mess with dilation, but we do need to check on use low poly mesh as high poly mesh. We don't have a high poly mesh to actually bake with this, and that's fine. We're still just learning Substance Painter, so we don't want to get too complicated yet. After that, we don't really need to mess with anything since we are baking the low poly onto itself. Down here underneath all of these things, we don't need to bake out the ID map, but we probably should bake out all of the others just in case we need them. Except for these ones that are even checked anyway. And then all we need to do is click Baked Selected Textures, and it will bake it out for us. We'll see it go through all the different types. And it honestly, for what this is probably not going to look too different than what it previously looked like. So I'm going to click Return to Painting Mode, but we can see that we now have all of our, except for the ones we turned off, which we don't need, all of these extra maps that are kind of baked. The one that might be kind of useful is our ambient occlusion. If we, don't do this part, but let me turn it off real quick. You can see maybe a subtle difference. Let me zoom in a little bit closer. You know, it's not a very detailed model, but you can see kind of in that crack right there, if I turn the ambient occlusion off, it's just a little bit lighter. But you know, we want to keep that nice little shadow. It can help out a little bit. And we are good to begin working. So let's texture this. Let's kind of have some fun with this. Let's pretend we're making, you know, more of like a whimsical kind of Halloween tombstone. Not too serious with it, but we still want to make it look pretty realistic. So we're going to start with picking a base that looks, you know, close to what we want, and then altering it to be what we need. And I'm hoping that the ones that I choose look close to the ones that you have, but we're also going to look at some other options for us. So we do want to kind of maybe start off with a concrete. So I have this concrete cast, and I'm going to just drag and drop that onto my model. It's going to take a moment. There we go. So one thing we can fix right away, and I want to kind of show this to you. Notice how we have this really ugly seam right here. Do you see that? So it's nice on this side. Maybe we can kind of see that seam up there, but man, it's really getting these kind of ugly seams of where our UVs are, because, you know, it's kind of cutting and it kind of ends. So, you know, it's okay, but this is actually a very easy fix. I'm going to show you how to fix this. So the reason it's doing this is if we select that concrete cast and we look at the properties, the one we want to look at is the projection. And this is how is it applying this texture to this 3D model. And the way it's doing that right now is UV projection. So what it does is it's just kind of projecting it onto the 2D, which is why we're getting those seams where we see the seams, you know, on here. That makes, you know, makes sense. So the easiest way to fix this is going to be to change your projection from UV projection to triplanar projection. And we can see that it instantly fixes it. And you can see it kind of changed to like this box, because the way this kind of works then is it's using the projection from the box to kind of project onto the surface of this. So we got like those seams kind of fixed. And, you know, kind of click through these. If you've never played with these, you know, what is a planar projection? How does that work? What do some of these other ones look like? Like what would a spherical look like? Oh, that's kind of, you know, weird, but you might have an instance where you'd want something to be projected like that. Same thing with the cylindrical. And you can also do the warp projection, but it's kind of an odd one. I've never really played with this, but the triplanar, I use basically UV or triplanar pretty much all the time to fix all of those issues. Sometimes though, when you do your triplanar, you might need to fix your tiling or the rotation based on what it looks like. But yeah, we got a good, nice base going. Maybe we want to change a preset. Let's try the cracked cast concrete. Oh, that's a little bit too much. Bleached. No, I don't like that. Wet. It's a little too wet for me, but I'm going to go back and undo all those. I might want to tweak these just a little bit. I might want to change the color just to be a little bit darker to start. Maybe up that color variation. I kind of like that. It makes it look really weathered. I kind of like that. And I do want to kind of up that roughness. But I do like to do the variation. Let's see what the cracks look like and see if I like those. I'm not too much of a fan of that. Yeah, let's not do cracks. We can do some another way. So we have this to start. A good single one, but remember, we want to really make this look the way that, you know, we want to make it look the way that we want it to look, and maybe we want to really push this because everyone will know what this concrete looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and grab, oops, be careful about clicking on things. Let's look at concrete course maybe. So we got concrete cast. Let's do concrete course. I'm going to drop that as a fill layer above this. But I do want to take off most of this. Let's do, what does wet look like? No. Maybe this cracked coarse concrete is good, but it's a little bit strong. I'm probably going to take out damage intensity. No, that's way too much. I do want to make sure I am switching this to triplanar. I'm going to probably tile it down to 0.5. But, you know, I don't really want this over the entire thing. It's a little bit too much. I just want it maybe like sparsely kind of over it. So I'm going to go ahead and add a black mask. And I'm going to add a fill layer to this. And I'm going to choose a grunge to kind of help this peep through just a little bit. Let's see. Maybe that one, the charcoal might look kind of nice. Let's see. I do want to make sure that, again, you see how it's kind of fitting kind of weird. We can change that to a triplanar projection. I'm probably going to invert this one too. Yeah, there we go. Play with the balance some. Does it have a seed? Yep, random. Oh, the seed doesn't work. Sometimes those don't work. Contrast. I don't like that. And sometimes you really don't know what you want until you play with it some. I like it. It's a little bit strong though, so I'm going to go ahead and turn down the opacity. And notice that I am only changing the opacity on my base color when I'm doing this. You see that? If you wanted to change it on a individual, you could always throw like a layers on there, but I kind of like that height on there, but I don't want it to be so bright. So we kind of get that nice bumpy height, but it's blending more in with the original color. And there we go. We're starting to get some nice stuff. Now that we have kind of a good base, I do want to work a little bit on adding some dirt. We could do kind of a similar thing where we drop on like a material and then we use a fill layer for a grunge, but I do kind of want to show you a slightly different approach for this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and find like a ground material, like a dirt that I have. So just like this ground, and I'm going to put it on top. I can go ahead and also kind of adjust this. Maybe not that one. Golden, maybe? No. Let's kind of go back to the regular one and just make it a little bit darker. So let's just kind of darken this. I don't need it so shiny either. I'm going to make it really dry. And no, that's pretty good. We'll keep it like that. So instead of doing that, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to go over here underneath assets. I'm going to choose smart masks. This is a bunch of different types of masks that we can use then that utilize those maps that we baked out at the beginning. That's kind of the reason why you want to bake those out, is so that you can ultimately kind of work with these. There's a lot out there. There's a lot that come with it. What I would recommend is that you just kind of play with things and, you know, see what happens, because you're never going to be able to kind of learn, you know, you can't just like read a guide and figure out how to do them. It's, you know, that's helpful, but the best way to do this is going to be to just try out stuff. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. So I'm going to try this ground dirt and drop it onto that. And we can see what this is doing is it's kind of making it so that it only appears on the bottom. So, you know, it can kind of get a more precise sort of look to it. So I can come in and do some like editing with this mask editor. Like we could change a little bit of like the balance, you know, depending on how much we want, because I might not want too much. You know, change the contrast on that. We can also make sure that, you know, some other stuff we can balance, like the position gradient. So do we want it higher? Do we want it a little bit lower? All of these kind of make slight adjustments to things. So, you know, do we want to bring it up on the edges? So that's why you really kind of have to get into here and just play with this and see what happens. So we got some nice grunge going on the bottom there. The next thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to do maybe a little bit with this moss one, like the moss from top. I might not actually have it be moss though. We'll see what ends up happening. So let's go back to our materials. Let's see if we can find something that will work well for what we want. You know what? I like this cork one. Let's do this cork natural, but we're going to try to do it and use it in some weird sort of ways. So let me drop that on. First thing I'm going to do is make sure that I switch this over to triplanar. I'm going to also change the color to maybe something that looks a little bit more mossy, like, you know, a deeper kind of green sort of look to it. There we go. We can also change like the density of it, make it feel a little bit more mossy. Maybe up that color variation a little. And ultimately though, what I'm going to do is come over to our smart masks. I'm going to grab that moss. I'm going to drop that on so that it comes in on top. It's a little bit strong for what I need, but we can kind of work with this. So I am going to use triplanar. We can start to like drop down that curvature so that we're not getting it going down the sides. Let's see, scratches. I don't really need too many. Scatter. Ooh, let's do something like that. Top down gradient. Yeah, we can take that down. So we just wanted a little bit up there. And let's see, level. Maybe I'll pull it up, but then I'll drop this down. Contrast. And a lot of this is just kind of playing with it. Just a little bit of that curvature. See what we like. Oop, nope. And maybe just something kind of like that. So we got our dirt kind of on the bottom and our moss up on the top. But let's take this a step further. What if we wanted to put actual like words on here so that it does look like a carved in tombstone? And just like everything that we've been working on with this, we're not going to do it as a direct paint on. We are going to do this as a mask layer. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to make a fill layer. I'm going to then, just as a default then though, just to kind of get us going, let's go over to our little drop down here and go to fonts. So we have a lot of different fonts to choose from. There are ways that we can also import in our own fonts. I'm going to though just kind of work with maybe this, what is this one called? I'm going to just drop it onto here as a mask. Metamorphosis. And let's change this to say, let's just get this working. Where is it? Oops. You see that? It made its own paint. So let's leave this bottom one off. That's why we can't see this. Back to our fill. Let's make it white. There we go. So the issue was I already had that white fill layer. I had to delete it out because when you drag and drop, it just makes its own thing. So we can then position this. This might be a good time to switch over maybe to the 2D only side. So we can kind of see where it's at. Or on the 3D side, we can switch this over to orthographic. That might help us position it a little bit better. But we need to know what we want to say. We can change that over here underneath when we have that fill selected. So we'll say here, let me type, hold on. My keyboard's acting up a bit here. Lies. Lester. More. We'll leave it at that. If you know what that's from, if you wish to continue the phrase, you know, feel free. But this works, you know, very similar to a font tool, where we can change, you know, our size. We might need to change a little bit with this though. Let's see. Underneath the UV transformation, 3D projection settings, we can make this bigger. Oops, we don't make it negative by accident. Let's try a 1. One. And then we can make this font size a little bit better. I'm going to move it down though. To something like that. So once we have it positioned like that, we can then kind of adjust how this looks. That white is just there so that we can position it. We know where it's at. We're happy with that. So I'm going to go back to that fill. And this is what I'm going to do. I actually, do I want a base? Yes, let's do base. I'm going to, though, change this. I'm going to use the eyedropper to kind of pick one of these, you know, something kind of close, maybe make it a little bit darker. Not too much darker, though. I'm then going to then change, where is that? The height. So if we push the height up, we can see that it looks like it's sticking out. But we don't want that because what it's going to happen is we actually want it to go in. So it looks like it's kind of carved into the surface. And I do want to make it really rough. We don't want it metallic though. There we go. Here lies Lester Moore. Some other things that we could do to this, you know, if we did want to actually change the color, we probably don't. Well, you know what? Let me get that. Let me get close again to maybe one of these dark colors. And what we can do is on the base color, we can drop the opacity so it's just a little bit darker. But we can always also move this underneath all of that grunge that we did previously so that all of that kind of goes then over our carved out letters. Here lies Lester Moore. There we go. If we wanted to, we could always stack this too. We could always add another fill. That is a, let me remember which way, maybe a multiply And then we can throw in here like a grunge that kind of like chews this up a little bit. So like, or one of these. No, maybe this one. But we really want to bring it back. Might need to be an opposite. There we go. This one might be a little too pixely. Let's try a different grunge. But don't forget that we can do this if you do want to, like you can stack those. I don't quite like how it looks, so I'm going to take it off, but just be aware, you can try stacking these. Let me try adding a lighten. No, I don't like that at all. Let's get rid of that. To get a look closer to what you want. I do want to put like a nice kind of image up here too. Usually tombstones will have like an icon type thing, like a symbol at the top. So we can use another technique to do this. There's actually two different ways we could approach this. The first one is going to be, again, using a fill layer. We are then going to use on there another. How do I want to do this? Do I want to do it this way? Yeah, I'll show this first. So we're going to do a fill layer. We're going to add a black mask, but this time we're going to add a paint to that mask, so that what we can actually do on here, if we scroll down, like we could paint, our symbol on there, but that's not going to turn out super well. Instead, we can come down here to our stencil. So that's a paint stencil. And the way this kind of works is you add a grayscale image to this. So there's a lot of grayscale images that we have just kind of built in. If we look over in our assets, they'd be underneath the alphas. And we can just find an image that we want to use for this tombstone. Let's see. Anything fun? Let's do, you can choose anything you really want. Let's do the biohazard symbol. That's pretty fun. Or radiation. We'll do radiation. So you can see that's on there. Then we can, I'm sorry, that went in the wrong spot, not the alpha. Stencil. There we go. And the way this works is it's like a stencil for, how would you call that? Like spray painting. Like you could hold up a stencil and spray paint it. So what you need to do is you need to position your, let me change my brush real quick. You need to position your view in the most perfect of places. So zoom in really close. This might also be a time that you use the opacity, I'm sorry, orthographic view. And you can then, paint on that stencil. See, it's kind of like you're using that paintbrush then to kind of spray through. And remember, we're doing this on the mask, so we can adjust how this actually looks later. And then we can turn off that stencil. Oops, I keep doing that. I keep going to the wrong spot. The method I usually do, I would rather do for this is if you have a really good, if you have a really good unwrap, you can do this on this side instead. And usually you can get it a little bit straighter. I keep going to the wrong one. Let's go to this one. Got the stencil. So we can zoom in. position it, and we know it's going to be straight, but this only works if you have a really good 3D unwrap. Otherwise, it's going to not turn out super well. But I made the unwrap for this. I know it's super straight. So if we do it on this side, it's going to come out perfect. There we go. Let's turn that stencil off. And let's switch over to the 3D only side. So very similar to how we did the text, we can then come into here and we can make adjustments. Like if we did want to change the base color to something like darker, like let's use our color picker. Just pick like a darker kind of color. Make the height so it looks like it's pushed in. Roughness should be up. And I probably should put this under all of my grunge. So let's put it down here. That way it looks like it's kind of built in. So stencils are one way to do this. One thing I did notice, and let me kind of backtrack a little bit, we did end up accidentally putting our text backwards on the back side of that. So let's take a moment to fix this. I didn't realize it was doing that. I guess it's good to make sure that you are kind of going around your entire thing. Let's go back to where that is. The easiest way to fix this is going to be to add a paint layer to our mask. And we can just switch that to a multiply. So we're going to paint on it just black. And we can kind of come in here and just paint this out of, we're taking it out of the mask. So it's still good on this side, but now we painted it out on that back side. There we go. We could also do this, this kind of concept too on other masks. Like let's decide, what if we decide that we really don't like so much of this here? Like we want to kind of take it out, but we really don't want to fiddle too much with that, you know, this all set up on here. We can always go ahead and add a paint. Set that to multiply, get our black, and we can kind of spot, take things out. We can always just get a better brush too. Let's go to our brushes. We haven't really touched much on brushes. That is coming in other lessons. But, you know, experiment with it. It can be a nice way to kind of clean up those masks if you're getting stuff where you don't quite want it to be. There you go. We could also use this to bring stuff back. Like we could always then add a paint, switch the color to white, and kind of paint back masks too. But this would have to be set to like a lighten rather than a multiply. Here lies Lester Moore. One last thing I do want to show you is another way that we can kind of project some stuff onto here. And that is using the projection tool over here. So projection tool is very similar to a mask. I'm sorry, to a stencil. Be aware that you can also use the stencil on, you know, more advanced things like we could have easily come over and, you know, grabbed another, let's grab a weird material. Like, let's say we are grabbing this material. I think it's like a steak, organic flesh. That's kind of weird. Maybe you want to put flesh on it for some reason, because it's now a horror game. But we can also drag those, everything we've been doing. We can use those smart masks on those. We can use the stencil on these. So, like if we add our paint, we could always stencil paint if for some reason we needed to. On that as well. So that's kind of, Substance Painter seems very simple at first, but it is an extremely deep program where we can use this in a lot of different ways. Oops, I'm not quite doing this right. Add a black mask. Then we add our paint, which is a stencil of those bones. There we go. That's better. For some reason, there is a fleshy bone stencil on the back of this. A lot of, tools, very straightforward, but it does take a little bit of time to master some of these. So please play around with these as much as you can. Again, okay, let me go back to using the projection. This is very similar to the stencil. It just works a little bit different. So let me make a new paint layer. Let me take this stencil off that paint layer. But instead, let's turn on the projection tool. The way the projection tool works is rather than projecting, the stencil, we have an alpha. And, we can set that up nicely on, as a mask. But the way that this kind of works is rather than an alpha, instead you are projecting a material. So I have like these denim rivets. I can drop those into the material that I want to project. And then I can paint that denim rivet material right onto here. I don't know why I'd want to do that. It's kind of weird. Let me turn that off. There you go. So we can easily project different materials then onto things, but this is done more as a paint layer. I myself do kind of prefer to do things with fill layers and then masking and stencils, because the downside of this now is I did it and I can't adjust this. Like I can't go in and make changes to this. So it like has a lot of downsides. It can be quicker. Like if you have something very specific, you can just use that projection to project stuff. But building it up by using fills or materials with masks and then using the stencil to do that, I feel you have a little bit more control and you can kind of make things go, you can make fixes. So we have this, and I'm going to stop the video here because I do want to make a video about uploading to Sketchfab, but I kind of want to make that its own video. So hopefully you had fun with this, but if you are following along because this is a lecture, please make sure you go on to the next video.